All right, let's dive in.
Dive deep.
Yeah, deep dive
This
today
sounds good.
into operational resilience in UK financial services.
Okay.
Um, those systems that kind of keep our money safe, make sure we can pay our bills,
Right.
generally keep the financial world ticking.
Yeah, keep it ticking. So,
And that's more important than ever, right? I mean,
yeah.
with everything that's been going on, global pandemics to cyber
Yeah,
attacks.
exactly. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a lot. And to really understand how the UK is approaching this, we've got, well, I think a pretty good set of sources.
oh,
We're going straight to the source. We've got excerpts from the Financial Conduct Authority.
the FCA.
Yeah, FCA, specifically chapters 4, 13, and 15A of their regulatory documents.
Right.
So really getting into the weeds there.
Love it.
And then, to get some real world perspective, we've
Sure.
got blog posts like Navigating the FCA Operational Resilience Framework
Mm-hmm.
and PSD2 Payment Service Providers Incident Management Procedures 2022. So very specific.
Right. And to kind of tie it all together,
Yeah.
we've got a nice overview
Yeah.
called FCA Operational Resilience Planning.
That's great. Sounds like we've got all our bases covered.
Yeah, I think we do.
I'm ready.
So I guess let's just start with the basics.
Sure.
Like, what exactly ICA operational resilience?
Yeah.
It's got to be more than just having a backup generator.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Okay.
Definitely not. Think of it this way. Imagine a financial institution as like a ship
Okay.
sailing through stormy seas.
Okay.
Operational resilience is that ship's ability to not only stay afloat,
Right.
but to also, keep sailing towards its destination, even when things get really rough.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So it's not just about surviving, it's about continuing to function effectively.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision,
Okay.
which sets, global standards for banks,
Right.
they actually define operational resilience as the ability to manage those risks arising from people, processes, systems, and external events.
So it's the whole picture.
The whole picture. It's not just about IT
Yeah.
or cybersecurity. It's
Right.
everything. It's the whole thing.
Okay, so it's about the entire ecosystem
Yeah.
that keeps a financial institution running.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the FCA, the UK's watchdog,
Yeah.
fit into all of this?
Well, they've created a framework
Okay.
that sets out, these clear expectations for firms
Right.
on how to actually build operational resilience. It's
Okay.
not a suggestion.
Right. It's a requirement.
It's a requirement.
Got it.
And one of the key principles is that firms need to organize and control their affairs responsibly and effectively, and that's principle 3.
Okay.
And that really sets the tone for everything else.
All right. So it's about being proactive,
Proactive, yeah.
not just waiting for something to break
Right, exactly.
and then trying to fix it.
Yeah.
The FCA framework really emphasizes that proactive approach.
It does.
And it starts by asking firms to identify
Yeah.
their important business services.
Right.
So what are those absolutely essential functions that, if disrupted, would cause major problems for customers and the system as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, think about like a large retail bank.
Right.
Those important business services might include online banking,
Oh,
ATM operations,
Right.
and payment processing. I mean, imagine if those went down.
oh yeah.
It'd be chaos.
Talk about a meltdown.
Total meltdown.
And that's just one bank?
Yeah, think about the whole system.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be huge.
Okay, so once they identify
Yeah.
those essential services,
Yes.
what happens next?
Well, then they have to map out
Okay.
all the dependencies, the
Yes.
interconnections between people, processes, technology,
Right.
and even third-party providers that are crucial for those services to actually function.
Yeah.
One of the blog posts we read used the example of an insurance company
Okay.
mapping out its claims processing, and it just highlighted how complex these
Yeah.
webs of dependencies can get.
It's like untangling a giant knot,
It is.
but with potentially huge consequences
It absolutely.
if you miss a strand.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what's next?
Okay, then comes the step of setting impact tolerances.
Okay.
This is where firms essentially draw a line in the sand
Right.
and they say, okay, for this particular service, we can only tolerate this much disruption.
So it's like setting boundaries
It is, yeah.
for how much downtime
Downtime.
or disruption is acceptable
Right.
for each of those critical services
Yes.
before it really starts having serious consequences
Serious consequences, yeah.
for customers or the wider market.
For sure.
They mentioned a wealth management firm
Okay.
in one of the sources that set like a 2-hour impact tolerance
Wow. Yeah.
for their portfolio management service.
That's pretty tight.
anything beyond that
Yeah.
was a major problem.
Yeah. Big problem.
So they're really serious
They-
about minimizing the impact on people's lives.
Exactly.
It's not just about keeping the lights on.
Right. You got it.
Okay, so they've identified those critical services.
Yes.
They've mapped out
Right.
all the dependencies.
All the dependencies.
And they've set impact tolerances.
Impact tolerances.
What's the final piece?
The final piece. Testing, testing, testing.
Of course. Got to test it.
You got to test it.
So it's not enough to just have a plan.
Right.
You have to make sure it actually works.
In the real world, yep.
Under pressure.
Under pressure.
And it can't just be
Right.
like a generic business continuity plan.
It can't. It has to be designed to meet those impact tolerances
Right.
for each specific service.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually gave an example of a trading platform simulating a cyber attack.
Oh, wow.
That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so they're really putting it
To the test.
to the test.
Yeah.
And it's not just about passing the test.
No,
It's about learning from it
absolutely.
and continuously improving.
That's the whole point.
Okay.
But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here.
Okay.
Let's delve deeper into those specific
Oh, yeah.
FCA requirements and considerations.
Right. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it gets pretty interesting.
Okay. Like governance?
Yeah, I mean, chapters 4 and 15A of the FCA's guidance
Yeah.
really gets into the weeds
Right.
on this stuff.
What really stood out to you?
Well, it's fascinating how much emphasis
Okay.
they place on those roles and responsibilities.
Mhm.
I mean, they've got specific expectations for everyone.
For everyone.
From the management body and senior personnel
Right.
to the nomination committees.
Wow.
And they're big on the two independent minds concept,
Okay. Yeah.
making sure that there's sound decision-making.
So checks and balances.
Checks and balances, exactly.
And they were really clear that certain roles,
Yes.
like the chairman,
Right,
can't be combined with other positions.
right, to avoid those conflicts of interest.
Yeah. Got to avoid those conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
It's all about building a strong foundation of ethical and responsible leadership.
That's it.
Okay.
And then that kind of leads us to another crucial piece of the puzzle. Communication.
Okay.
I mean, both Chapter 15A
Yeah.
and that blog post about PSD2 incident management procedures
Yeah.
really drove home how important it is
Yeah.
to communicate
Communicate. Yeah.
effectively,
Mm.
both internally
Yeah.
and externally
During a disruption.
during a disruption.
So it's not just about sending out
No, not at all.
like a generic press release.
Right. They're talking about reaching those diverse stakeholders,
Right.
even those who might not be directly connected
Yeah.
to the firm,
Right.
and tailoring those messages
Yeah.
to those specific needs and vulnerabilities.
So not everyone's going to react the
About
same
it.
way to a disruption.
To a disruption, no.
Okay.
It's recognizing that.
Right. And it's not just about what happens during a disruption.
Right.
It's about having those communication strategies
In place beforehand.
in place beforehand
Yeah.
so you're ready to act
Exactly.
quickly and effectively.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another big one,
Okay.
outsourcing.
Outsourcing, yeah.
I mean, it's so common
It's everywhere.
in financial services these days,
Yeah.
but just because you outsource a service
Right.
doesn't mean you outsource the responsibility.
That's a common misconception.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Chapter 13 was very clear about that.
okay.
Firms need to do their due diligence
Yeah.
when they're outsourcing,
Okay.
especially for those material outsourcing arrangements.
So the ones that are really critical
They're critical.
to the operations.
Yes, we're talking careful planning, robust contracts,
Right.
contingency planning.
You can't just assume.
They
The
can't,
service provider is going to take care of everything.
that they'll handle it all.
Okay, so
It's about maintaining that oversight and control. Yeah.
even when the tasks are being handled by someone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole area of
Yeah.
business continuity planning
Right.
and preparing for those unexpected events.
The what if
Yeah.
scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, chapters 4 and 13 really emphasize that.
The importance of thinking through those unexpected disruptions.
It can really throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is that the FCA acknowledges that,
Okay.
sometimes in an emergency,
Right.
a firm might have to, deviate from specific rules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's some flexibility
All right.
in those extreme circumstances.
So there's a little bit of breathing room
A little bit of breathing room.
if they need to make
If you need to make those tough calls.
those tough calls.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Okay.
It's about being adaptable
It is.
and finding solutions,
Yeah,
even in challenging circumstances.
absolutely.
But it's not just about systems and processes.
Right.
Right.
We got to talk about people,
People.
the human element,
Yeah, the human element.
which often gets overlooked.
It does.
This is where the people part of that Basel
The
definition
Basel definition.
really comes into play.
For sure.
And Chapter 13's guidance
Yeah.
on this is pretty insightful.
Yeah.
They talk about the importance of training, competency,
Mm-hmm.
having remuneration structures
Right.
that don't incentivize
Don't incentivize risky behavior. Yeah.
risky behavior
Mm-hmm.
and fostering a strong culture of compliance.
Yeah.
All of that is crucial
Absolutely.
for
That's
minimizing
what they call
people risk.
people risks.
And they even highlighted the importance of making sure
Yeah.
that client-facing staff
Right.
are adequately trained
Adequately trained.
for effective communication,
Effective communication is huge,
especially during disruptions.
especially during those events.
So it all comes back
It all ties back, yeah.
to consumer
To
protection,
consumer protection.
making sure customers feel heard
Heard.
and supported,
Supported, even when things go wrong.
even when things go wrong.
Yeah.
So it's about building trust
It is.
and maintaining confidence,
Confident.
even in the face of adversity.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's a holistic approach,
Holistic approach,
and
exactly.
it recognizes the interconnectedness.
The interconnectedness of it all.
Okay, so we've laid a solid foundation here.
We have.
We've defined
Yeah.
operational resilience,
Yeah.
explored the key component
Explored the key components
of the FCA framework,
of the FCA framework.
and started to kind of unpack
Yeah.
some of those
Specific requirements.
specific requirements and considerations.
It's a lot, but
But I have a feeling
yeah,
we've only just scratched the surface.
I think you're right.
I'm ready to dive deeper
I am too.
into those details
Let's do it.
and really understand
Yeah.
how firms are building
Check this.
operational resilience in practice. Okay, so we're back,
Back again.
ready to delve deeper
Deeper.
into the practicalities
Yeah, practicalities.
of operational resilience in UK financial services.
Right.
Before the break, we were talking about how firms need to identify
Yes.
those crucial, important business services.
Those important business services.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not as simple as just saying, well, everything's important.
Oh, absolutely not.
Chapter 15A of the SCA guidance actually lays out
It does.
some really specific factors
Very specific.
that firms should consider.
Yeah.
So let's break it down.
All right, break it down.
What are some of those key considerations
Okay.
when it comes to pinpointing those essential services?
Well, the first thing they need to think about is
Right.
the nature of their client base.
Right.
Are there any vulnerabilities
Okay.
that could make certain clients more susceptible to harm
Right.
from a disruption?
So certain groups of customers
Exactly.
might be more dependent
More dependent.
on specific services
Mm-hmm.
or might have unique needs
Yeah, unique needs.
that make them particularly vulnerable
Vulnerable. Yeah.
during a disruption.
During a disruption. That's a good point.
Okay.
They also need to consider how easily
Mm-hmm.
clients could switch to another provider if a service is disrupted.
So if it's
They
easy.
call this substitutability,
Okay.
the FCA.
Right.
If it's relatively easy for clients to go elsewhere,
Yeah.
the impact of a disruption might be less severe.
Okay. So it's not just about the service itself.
It's about those alternatives.
Right. How essential that particular service is
to those clients.
to those specific clients.
To those specific clients, yeah.
Okay. And then there's the
Okay.
time criticality factor.
Time criticality, yeah.
How quickly do clients actually need
Need that service, yeah.
that service?
Some are much more time sensitive than others.
Right. So,
Yeah, think about something like real-time payments versus updating your contact information.
right. It's very different.
Huge difference.
The difference between
Yeah.
needing access to your money right now
Right now.
versus being able to wait a few hours
Or even a day.
or even a day.
Yeah, exactly.
And then obviously they have to consider
Of course.
the number of clients
The number of clients
who rely on that service.
who rely on that service, yeah.
The more clients affected by a disruption,
The bigger the impact.
the bigger the impact.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really starting to make sense now.
Okay, good.
It's not just a matter of
Yeah.
listing out all the services.
Right, yeah.
It's about understanding
Yeah,
the potential ripple effects
ripple effects
of a disruption
of a disruption for sure.
and who would be most affected.
And who would be most effective? That's key.
Okay, and they can't forget about
They can't.
the sensitivity of the data
Oh, data sensitivity is huge.
that's involved, right?
Huge.
Some services handle incredibly sensitive personal and financial information.
That's a lot of responsibility.
So the potential for harm goes way beyond
Way beyond.
just inconvenience.
Yeah.
If that sensitive data
Sensitive data.
is compromised.
Yeah, it could be a disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just about
them.
the clients themselves.
Not just the clients.
Right. Chapter 15A also highlights the need to consider
Right.
the potential impact
Yeah.
of a disruption.
On the wider financial system.
The wider
system, could it disrupt the markets?
Right.
Could it threaten the firm itself?
Okay, so they need to think about both the micro
And macro, yeah.
and the macro.
The individual clients
Yeah.
and the system as a whole.
The system as a whole.
Yeah.
And they also need to think about
Right.
their reputation.
Reputation. That's
Right.
huge.
Right.
Mhm.
If they're seen as unable to handle disruptions,
If they can't handle it,
effectively, it could really erode
trust
trust
and have a lasting impact. Yeah.
on their business.
A damaged reputation
Yeah,
can be hard to repair.
very hard.
It can make it harder
Yeah.
to attract new clients.
Attract new clients. Retain existing clients.
Retain existing clients.
Even secure funding.
Yeah, all those things
You know,
are important.
Very important.
And then finally,
Finally.
they need to consider their legal and regulatory obligations. Could a disruption to a particular service
Yeah.
lead to a breach of those obligations?
A breach.
So that service is likely
Likely to be considered.
pretty high on the importance scale.
Very high on the importance scale.
Okay, it's like this checklist of potential consequences.
It's a big checklist.
Right.
Yeah.
Client impact.
Client impact.
Financial losses.
Financial loss.
Reputational damage. Regulatory breaches.
Breaches, yeah.
So it seems like identifying
Mhm.
those essential services
It's a rigorous process.
is a pretty rigorous process.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once they've got that list
Yeah.
of essential services,
Of essential services, the next step.
the next step is to set those impact tolerances.
Setting those impact tolerances, right?
Yeah.
Those limits for how much disruption each service can handle
Yeah.
before it crosses the line
Before it crosses the line.
into unacceptable consequences.
Oh, okay.
But what are some of the factors they consider when setting those tolerances?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it just a number
Is it arbitrary?
they pull out of a hat?
Right.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Chapter 15A gives us some insight
Okay.
into how they should approach this.
Yeah.
It's similar to identifying those important business services,
Okay.
but the focus shifts
Okay.
to quantifying
Right.
the impact of a potential disruption.
Okay, I'm ready to break this down.
Let's break it down.
What are some of those key considerations?
All right, well, just like before,
Okay.
they need to start by
Okay.
thinking about their client base.
Right.
Different clients will have different levels
Right. Of tolerance.
of disruption.
For disruption, yeah.
So those vulnerabilities need to be
Taken into account.
taken into account.
For sure.
So again, it's understanding the needs
The unique needs.
and vulnerabilities
Less vulnerabilities.
of different client groups.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then they need to consider
Okay.
the number of clients
Okay.
potentially affected by a disruption
Mhm.
and the nature of that impact.
Right. So it's not just about
Right. It's not just about the number.
how many people might be inconvenienced.
Yeah, it's about how bad.
It's about
How severe.
How severe. Yeah.
So a disruption that affects a small number of clients
Yeah.
but has severe consequences
Yeah.
might be considered
It's just as serious
just as serious.
as a disruption that affects a larger number,
Right.
but has less severe consequences for each individual.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously, they can't forget about
Of course not.
the potential
Financial losses,
financial losses
both for their clients
for their clients.
and for the firm itself.
Yeah, both.
So they need to assess the potential,
Assess the potential.
financial impact of a service disruption,
Financial impact, yeah.
and set those tolerances
Set those tolerances.
to minimize those potential losses.
Absolutely.
And financial losses can have
Oh, yeah.
like a ripple effect, right?
A ripple effect, yeah.
It's not just about the money itself.
Right.
It's about those knock-on effects.
The knock-on effects, yeah.
For clients, the firm's stability,
For sure.
and even the wider market.
The wider market, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't forget about reputational damage,
Reputational damage.
which we talked about earlier.
We did talk about that.
Chapter 15A really highlights
It does.
the importance of considering that potential
That potential.
level of reputational harm,
Harm, yeah.
especially if that harm could
Also-
then have negative consequences
Negative consequence.
for clients,
Reliance.
for the wider financial system.
Wider financial system, yeah.
So it all comes back to that idea of interconnectedness.
Interconnectedness, that's the key.
Right.
Yeah.
The firm, the clients,
The market.
the market.
It's all part of the same ecosystem.
It's all part of the same ecosystem,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
And then there's that potential impact
Impact, yeah.
on market or consumer confidence,
Consumer confidence, that's a big one.
which can be
I mean, it's hard to quantify.
hard to quantify,
But crucial.
but it's crucial to consider.
Oh, yeah,
If
absolutely.
people lose faith
If they lose faith.
in a firm
Yeah,
or in the system as a whole,
it can be bad.
it can have far-reaching and long-lasting
Yeah.
consequences.
Consequences. Big ones.
Right. This is domino effect.
Domino effect.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another,
And it keeps going.
and it can be hard to stop.
Hard to stop.
That chain reaction.
That chain reaction. Okay, and then they need to get into the
Okay.
practicalities.
The practicalities.
What's the potential loss of functionality?
Loss of functionality.
Or access.
Or-
Clients.
Yeah.
For clients. If so
This
service
goes down.
is disrupted,
Yeah.
is there a risk of data breaches
Data breaches. Yeah.
or loss of data integrity?
Data integrity. Yeah.
These are all measurable impacts
Yeah.
that need to be factored
And
into
into those impact tolerances.
the impact tolerances.
That's the idea.
It's really starting to feel very
Yeah.
tangible now.
Tangible.
Taking those abstract concepts
That concepts.
and turning them into
Turning them into measurable metrics.
measurable, manageable,
Manageable. That's what it's all about.
and they also need to think about
They also need to think about
those cascading effects.
cascading effects. Yeah.
Right.
How a disruption to one service.
Right, because it's not always
Right.
about isolated incidents.
No, not at all.
A problem in one area
Well-
can quickly spread
Spread quickly.
and create a much larger problem.
Yeah, if those systems are interconnected,
Right.
Chapter 15A talks about that.
Yeah.
How the aggregate impact of disruptions to multiple services
Mhm.
could be much greater
Right?
if they share common resources.
Yeah, so it's understanding
It is
those
it.
interconnections.
Those interconnections are key.
Okay, this is all so fascinating.
It is fascinating.
But I do have a question
Okay.
about something we've been referencing
All right.
throughout this.
Yeah.
Those severe but plausible scenarios
Severe but plausible.
that firms need to consider when
Right.
setting those tolerances
Tolerances and testing.
in testing.
Testing, yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
What does that mean?
Like, how do you determine
Yeah, how do you
what's severe enough to worry about,
right?
but also plausible enough
Plausible enough?
to actually plan for?
That's a great question.
Okay.
It's a good one.
Well, thankfully,
Yeah.
Chapter 15A offers
It does some
practical guidance.
practical guidance.
For example, it highlights the importance
Okay.
of considering
Considering
fluctuations
fluctuations in demand
in demand
Mhm.
when setting
when setting those impact tolerances.
impact tolerances.
Yeah.
So if a particular service experiences
Yeah.
peaks in demand
Peaks in demand
at certain times
certain times
of the
of
day,
the day, of the week, of the year.
of the week, of the year,
Those need to be factored in.
those need to be factored in.
Absolutely.
They can't just set
They can't.
those tolerances
No.
based on average
Let's
usage.
say usage.
They need to be prepared
There for those peaks.
for those times when the stakes are higher
Yeah. When the stakes are higher.
and the potential impact
The potential impact.
of a disruption
Yeah.
could be more severe.
Much more severe.
Okay, so they're not just looking at
Right.
the normal operating conditions.
They're also looking at those stress points
So they're looking at the stress points,
and potential bottlenecks.
potential bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the plausible part?
Plausible, yeah.
How do firms figure out
How do they figure out?
what scenarios are actually worth planning for?
Well, it's all about understanding their specific risk profile,
Okay.
taking into account industry trends
Okay.
and considering those potential external events
Okay.
that could disrupt their operations.
So, for example,
Sir.
a major cyber attack
Cyber attack, yeah.
might be a highly plausible scenario
Mm-hmm.
for a firm that relies heavily on technology,
Technology, yeah.
whereas a natural disaster might be
Yeah, natural disaster
Claude-
for a firm in a geographically vulnerable area.
in a geographically vulnerable area.
Exactly.
So it's tailoring those scenarios
Tailoring the scenarios.
to their unique circumstances.
Yeah, thinking through
Right.
those potential consequences.
The consequence.
Yeah,
And that's where the scenario testing comes in.
scenario testing.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually putting those plans
Put it to the test.
and those tolerances
to the test.
to the test.
Test. See if it holds up
See if they hold up
under pressure.
under pressure.
Yeah,
So Chapter 15A is really specific
it is
about what they expect
what they expect. Yeah,
from firms when it comes to
when it comes to
scenario testing.
scenario testing. Yeah,
They need to have
they need a robust
testing plan
plan. Yeah,
that outlines
that outlines how
how they'll assess
right.
their ability to stay
To stay within those tolerances.
Within those tolerances, yeah.
When faced with those severe but plausible disruptions.
Yeah, those disruptions.
So it's not just about
It's not
hoping for the best.
hoping for the best, no.
It's about
having a plan.
a structured
It's a structured approach, yeah.
and systematic approach.
Good testing.
To testing.
Their resilience.
Their resilience, for sure.
Right.
And that testing plan needs to cover a lot of ground.
Okay, like what?
The types of testing they'll conduct,
Okay.
how often they'll test,
Mhm.
how many services they'll include,
Okay.
and even how they'll communicate with stakeholders.
During a simulated disruption.
During that simulated disruption, make it realistic.
So it's making it
Make it real.
as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
And those scenarios
scenarios.
that they test need to be tailored
They need to be tailored, yeah.
to their specific risk profile.
To their risk profile.
Right.
Right. We were just talking about those severe but plausible events.
Severe but plausible
Applies here too.
applies here as well.
Yeah.
And it's not just about
It's not just about
testing the same scenarios
the same scenarios. No.
over and over.
They should gradually
Uh,
increase in severity
okay.
and complexity.
Okay.
Got to push those limits
Yeah. Find those weak points
and those weak points
before a real disruption happens.
before it happens.
So they can fix them
So they can fix them, yeah.
and be prepared.
Be prepared. That's the goal.
So it's like a stress test
stress tests
for their systems
for the systems
and their people.
and the people. Yeah.
And they have flexibility
They do.
when it comes to
Yeah.
the format of those tests.
The format of those tests.
Right.
Desk-based exercises, simulations, full-scale drills
Full-scale drills.
involving multiple teams.
The goal is to make it
As close to the real thing
as close to a real-world disruption as possible.
as possible.
But what happens
What happened?
if they do uncover weaknesses or vulnerability
Ah, that's a good question.
during testing?
Yeah.
Is it a case of
Is it no harm, no foul?
no harm, no foul,
Mhm.
or are there consequences
Consequences, yeah.
for failing a test?
Well, it's not about brushing those findings under the rug. Right.
The FCA expects firms to,
Okay.
conduct those lessons learned exercises.
Okay.
After every scenario test.
They have a continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement.
Cross-sects test, learn,
Adapt, repeat.
adapt, repeat. You got it.
And it's not just about
It's
documenting what went wrong,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Chapter 15A is very clear that they must take action
Action.
and make those necessary improvements
Improvements. Yeah.
based on
Based on those lessons learned.
those lessons learned
Absolutely.
to ensure they can stay within their impact tolerances.
That's the goal.
So it's about turning
It's
those lessons
yeah.
into tangible improvements
Tangible. Yeah.
that make the firm more resilient.
That's what it's all about.
But it's not just about
No.
reacting to disruptions
It's not just reactive.
and
Well,
adapting after the fact.
it's also about those proactive steps
Right.
that they can take to enhance
enhance
their operational resilience
operational resilience
from the beginning.
from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And one area
Okay.
we haven't really talked about
We haven't touched on.
that plays a crucial role
What's that?
is technology.
Technology.
Right.
Yeah.
We've been so focused
You have
on the processes and the people.
on the people.
But in today's world,
Yeah.
technology is
It's everything.
the backbone of so much of what happens
Right.
in financial services.
Absolutely.
And the FCA recognizes this.
They do.
While they don't prescribe specific technology solutions, they do emphasize
They do.
the importance
The
of
importance of robust IT systems and control.
IT systems and controls.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things
Well, that's the most
firms need to be thinking about when it comes to
technology
and
operational resilience.
operational resilience?
Yeah. Good question.
Are they expected to be
Are they expected to be
on the bleeding edge
edge? Yeah.
of innovation?
Or is it more about having those solid, reliable systems in place?
Right.
Well, Chapter 13, which focuses on insurers,
Okay.
it actually has some really insightful guidance
Okay.
that can be applied more broadly across financial services.
Right.
They talk about the importance of a strong organizational and reporting structure
Okay.
for tech operations.
So it's about making sure
Right.
that technology isn't treated
Yeah.
as some
separate silo.
separate silo.
Right. It needs to be integrated
It needs to be integrated
into the firm's overall
into the overall
governance
structure.
Yeah.
So it has a seat at the table
A seat at the table.
when decisions are being made.
When decisions are made, it makes sense.
It
And
does.
technology shouldn't be
Technology shouldn't be an afterthought.
an afterthought.
No.
Right.
It should be part of,
how they approach risk.
woven into the fabric of how the firm operates.
Woven into the fabric, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole area of systems acquisition,
Right.
development, and maintenance.
Right.
Chapter 13 talks about
Okay.
having sound processes.
Yeah. So making sure
Yeah.
they're choosing the right systems.
The right systems.
For their needs.
That's their need.
Making sure those systems are developed
Securely.
and maintained over time.
And maintained over time.
Absolutely.
And they even talk about
They do.
embedding those security requirements
Yeah. Embed those requirements from the ground up.
from the ground up.
That's being proactive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the day-to-day
The day-to-day. Yeah.
of those IT systems.
Yeah. Responsibilities need to be
Clearly defined.
clearly defined, both within the IT department
Okay.
and across the business.
So it's about breaking down those silos.
Breaking down silos,
Fostering collaboration, yeah.
collaboration.
To avoid those "it's not my job" scenarios
Right.
when things go wrong.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
So it's creating a culture
a culture
of
of
shared responsibility
shared responsibility
for keeping
for keeping those systems
those systems running
smoothly,
smoothly and securely.
securely.
Okay.
And within all of that, information security is paramount.
Right.
Chapter 13 talks about
Oh.
establishing
Yeah.
and maintaining robust systems and controls
To manage,
to manage those information security risks.
those information security risks.
And they even break it down
Okay.
into 4 key principles:
4 key principles. Okay.
confidentiality, integrity, availability, and authentication,
Okay.
and non-repudiation and accountability.
Wow. That sounds pretty comprehensive.
It is.
Let's dive into
All right, so-
those 4 principles
Let's do it.
a bit.
Okay.
What do they mean
What do they mean?
by each of those?
Well, confidentiality,
Okay,
it's
how?
all about making sure information
Hmm.
is only accessible
To those who are authorized to see it.
to those who are authorized, yeah.
So, strong passwords. Okay, so we're back for the final part.
The final stretch
Yeah, final stretch
of our deep dive.
of our deep dive into operational resilience.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
but we still have some crucial topics
Explore.
to explore,
Yeah.
starting with
Yeah.
something that's
Foundational.
absolutely foundational to operational resilience.
Yeah.
Business continuity management.
Business continuity management, it's all about making sure those critical services can keep running
Yeah,
or be restored quickly
right,
when something bad happens.
right. So it's about having a plan B,
Having a plan B and maybe even a plan C.
a plan C for when things go wrong.
Right. And it's more than just having that
Oh, yeah.
dusty old binder on a shelf.
More than just a binder, absolutely.
Okay.
Chapter 13
Yeah.
of the FCA guidance
Okay.
really emphasizes.
Those high-level requirements
Right.
for systems and controls,
Mm-hmm.
they apply at all times,
At all times.
including when a business continuity plan
Okay.
is activated.
So it's not a separate set of rules
It's
that only kick in
Nope.
during an emergency.
it's about integrating those principles
Right.
into their day-to-day
Day-to-day operation.
operations. Yeah,
And the FCA acknowledges
they do.
that during a real emergency,
Yeah,
a firm
the firm.
might not be able to comply
Right.
with every single rule
Not every single one.
to the letter.
To the letter,
They
no.
point to
Yes, they do.
their guidance on emergency situations.
Right, which gives some flexibility. Some
Sure.
flexibility in
That's
their
good.
extreme circumstances.
So there's a little bit of
A little bit of room.
breathing room
Breathing room, yeah.
when those high-pressure decisions need to be made.
When you have to make those tough calls.
Right.
Yeah.
But let's zoom back in
Okay.
on those business continuity plans.
Okay. Business continuity plans.
What are some of the key things
Key things.
firms need to be thinking about?
Well, Chapter 13 gives us some good guidance here.
Okay.
They recommend that firms consider both the likelihood and the impact
Okay.
of potential disruptions.
So really understanding
Yeah, of understanding misses.
those weaknesses, those
Yeah.
potential points of failure,
Right.
and they break it down into 3 main categories.
3 main categories. Okay.
Loss or failure of resources,
Okay.
loss or corruption of information,
Okay.
and external events.
Okay. So let's
Let's unpack those.
unpack those a little bit. So
Okay.
loss of resources, I mean, that could include
It could include
staff shortages,
Yeah.
equipment failures,
equipment failures,
problems with
problems with their physical premises.
their physical premise.
Premises, yeah.
Right.
Anything that's essential for operations that could become unavailable.
And they really emphasize
you do.
thinking about the time scale.
The time scale.
Yeah, how long could those disruptions last?
So some might be
Some might be short.
short-lived.
Yeah.
Others could drag on
They could drag on.
for days,
Yeah.
weeks, even longer.
Even longer.
Right.
So they need plans in place.
So you need different plans for
You need different plans.
different scenarios.
Yeah, different scenarios and different time frames.
Okay.
Okay, then you've got loss or corruption of information.
Okay.
That's a big one.
Big one.
In today's world,
So we're talking about,
we're talking about data breaches,
let's go.
system failures, accidental deletion
Accidental deletion.
of critical data,
It's about protecting
protecting that information.
that information.
Yeah, at all costs.
And then those external events
External events
that are completely outside of their control.
outside of their control. Yeah.
Things like vandalism, war, natural disasters.
That's right.
Those can really disrupt operations,
They can.
even if the firm itself
Even if they're doing everything right internally.
is doing everything right.
Yeah.
So those unforeseen events
Unforeseen.
can be particularly challenging.
Challenging to plan for. Yeah.
But Chapter 13 encourages firms to think about,
They do.
not just reacting
Not just reacting.
to those disruptions,
And also taking steps.
but taking steps to reduce the likelihood.
Of them happening in the first place.
So things like succession planning,
Succession planning.
to minimize the impact of staff shortages,
That's a good one.
investing in robust systems
Robust systems.
to prevent data loss,
Or having backup locations.
backup location,
Or work from home capabilities.
work from home.
If the premises are inaccessible,
So it's about adding
it's about adding those layers of protection.
layers of protection.
Be proactive, anticipate those challenges.
Okay, and when it comes to developing those business continuity plans,
Yeah.
Chapter 13 breaks it down
Breaks it down.
into 4
key elements.
key elements.
Yeah.
So let's hear it.
All right.
What are we looking at?
First, they need to have those formal, written business continuity plans.
Okay, formal
Yeah.
written plans
That outline those specific steps they'll take
to minimize
to minimize the impact
of a disruption.
of a disruption.
And they need to cover those different time frames.
Okay.
Short term,
Short, medium, and long.
Again, it's about having
Different scenarios covered,
those different scenarios covered.
depending on the nature
Right.
and duration.
So a short-term power outage
Right.
is going to require a different response
Very.
in a major natural disaster.
Yeah, a major natural disaster.
Okay.
And those plans need to be comprehensive,
Comprehensive.
address things like resource requirements,
Yeah.
recovery priorities,
But what order?
what order, yeah,
They'll restore those critical services.
and communication plans.
Communication, yeah.
Who are they talking to? How are they talking to them?
So they really need to think through
They got to think it through.
the whole process.
The whole process, yeah.
Wow.
The second element is all about escalation.
Escalation. Okay. And invocation.
Invocation. So knowing when
Knowing when.
to push that big red button
That big red button.
and who has the authority to make that call.
Who has the authority? Exactly.
And they need to be very clear
Very clear.
about the chain of command.
The chain of command.
Yeah. Who's responsible for what and how they're going to communicate
Yeah.
during that activation.
During the activation process.
They even talk about like contact details.
Right.
Having those details.
All those
yeah.
essential contact details.
So you're not scrambling
Right.
to find phone numbers
In the middle of an
in
emergency.
the middle of an emergency. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Element number 3.
Element number 3. Okay.
Data integrity.
Okay.
They need to have processes
To validate.
the integrity of any information that might have been affected.
Okay. So making sure
Yeah, making sure the data is still accurate,
that it hasn't been corrupted
corrupted or compromised.
during the outage.
Yeah, that's key.
Okay. And the final element.
The final element is all about review and updates.
Review and update.
Keeping those plans up to date.
That's crucial.
It's crucial. Things change.
Yeah.
Risks evolve.
Right.
Those plans got to keep pace.
I get that.
Back to that continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement cycle.
You got it.
Right.
And they specifically talk about updating those plans after significant changes.
So any changes
Any changes
to their operations or risk profile,
to their operations or risk profile, yeah.
and including any changes
Including changes
that are identified through those scenario tests.
scenario tests.
So it's all
connected.
interconnected.
Those scenario tests aren't just about checking a box.
Right.
They're about gathering valuable information
To
improve those plans.
those business continuity plans.
That's right.
Okay.
And a lot of firms actually establish alternative sites.
Okay. So like a backup office
The backup office, yeah.
where they can shift operations.
If their main location is inaccessible.
Yeah, like a backup site.
A backup site, yeah.
But Chapter 13 cautions firms
They do?
to be careful
Careful, yeah.
when choosing
Choosing and assessing.
those alternative sites.
They need to consider location,
Okay.
speed of recovery,
Mm.
and adequacy of resources.
Resources, yeah.
They even mention, like, what happens if multiple firms
Oh, right.
are sharing the same alternative site?
And they all need to activate
And they all need to activate
at the same time.
simultaneously.
Yeah, it's like those evacuation routes.
Right.
They work great.
If everyone's moving in an orderly fashion.
Yeah, but if everybody
But if everyone panics,
and tries to get out,
it creates a bottleneck.
total bottleneck.
Right. Yeah.
So it's about anticipating those challenges,
Okay.
making sure those alternative sites are viable.
Okay. But let's move on
Marty.
to another big piece
Big piece of the puzzle.
of the operational resilience puzzle.
Outsourcing?
Outsourcing.
Yeah.
I mean, so many firms rely
So many.
on third-party providers
Third-party providers.
for critical services these days.
For those critical services, it's everywhere.
It feels like everything from
Yeah.
IT systems to
Customer support.
customer support is being outsourced.
It's true.
But, as we kind of touched on earlier,
We did.
outsourcing doesn't
Doesn't it all
absolve a firm
of its responsibility?
of its responsibilities. Chapter 13 goes into
More detail
a lot more detail.
about how they need to manage those arrangements
Right.
to minimize their exposure to risk.
So are they saying firms should avoid outsourcing?
Are they saying avoid it altogether?
altogether?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
But they do emphasize
Okay.
the need to be careful.
With what they call material outsourcing arrangements.
Okay,
Or
material,
outsourcing
the
arrangement.
ones that are critical to their operations.
Okay.
And they even suggest that firms should notify the FCA
Oh, wow.
when they're planning to enter into one of those.
So the FCA
The FCA is watching.
is keeping a close eye on this.
They are.
They want to make sure
They want to make
those firms are doing their due diligence.
due diligence.
Not just handing over
Yeah, not just handing over
critical
to
services
anybody.
to any third party.
Yeah, without careful consideration.
And they caution firms
You do.
against assuming
Don't assume.
that just because a
Correct.
provider
Is regulated.
or part of the same group,
That automatically means
it doesn't mean
it's low risk.
it doesn't mean it's low risk.
They need to do
our own assessment,
their own assessments and due diligence.
regardless of the provider's status.
So don't take anything for granted.
Don't take anything for
Do
granted.
your homework
Do your homework
before you hand over
before you hand it over.
those critical functions.
These critical functions.
And Chapter 13 actually outlines
It
a
does.
series of steps
The steps
that firms should take
Yeah.
before entering into
for entering into
or significantly changing
one of those material outsourcing arrangements.
one of those material outsourcing
Let's
arrangements.
start.
Okay, so
Well, first,
first on the list,
they need to analyze how that arrangement will fit into their
their overall
overall structure, their strategy,
organizational structure.
their risk profile,
Okay.
their ability to meet those regulatory obligations.
Okay, so making
Big
sure
lines
it aligns with their goals.
with your big picture goals.
Big picture, that's right.
Okay.
Then they need to consider
Okay.
whether the agreements establishing that arrangement
Okay.
will give them the ability
Okay.
to monitor and control their operational risk.
So they need clear contracts. Clear contracts, yeah.
In place.
That give them visibility.
Right, that give them
Into what the provider is doing.
that visibility.
How they're managing risk.
Okay.
How they're meeting those performance standards.
They can't just hand over
They can't just hand it over
the reins
and hope for the best.
and hope for the best.
Wow.
Okay, and then comes
And then comes due diligence.
due diligence,
They need to vet that provider.
checking those references.
Checking references, looking at their financial stability,
Oh,
their expertise, their track record.
their track record
Everything that gives them confidence
that this provider
that this provider is the right choice.
is the right choice.
And then they got to think about the transition.
The transition, right?
How will they move from their current arrangements
Okay,
to the new one?
right. And what happens if
What if the contract ends?
contract ends?
You need a plan for that.
Yeah, so minimize
Minimize disruption
disruption,
and ensure continuity.
Continuity.
And they even talk about concentration risk.
concentration risk. Okay.
What happens if they're relying on a single provider
Okay.
who's also being used by a lot of other firms?
So if that provider
If that provider goes down,
experiences a disruption,
it could impact
it could have a ripple effect
across the industry.
across the whole industry.
It's about diversifying
Diversifying,
and not putting all your eggs in one basket.
not putting putting all your eggs in one basket.
And when it comes to negotiating those contracts,
Okay.
they give firms a whole checklist
A whole checklist of things.
to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right.
What are some of those key contractual
considerations.
considerations when it comes to outsourcing?
Well, first they need to think about those reporting requirements.
Okay, reporting.
What information do they need
Okay,
from the provider?
from the provider.
And how often do they need it?
Okay,
And I need to build that into the contract.
so they need that transparency.
Transparency is key.
Right,
Yeah.
that line of sight into what's happening
Line of sight, that's a good way to put it.
with that outsourced service.
They also need to think about access.
Access, okay.
Will their internal auditors have the right to
Access the provider's
the provider's premises
premises,
to conduct audits?
Right.
What about external auditors?
right, or even
The FCA.
the FCA themselves.
Those access rights need to be secured.
Okay, so they can't outsource
They can't outsource their responsibility.
the responsibility for compliance.
Compliance, that's right.
They need to be able
You
to
need to see what's going on.
monitor what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then you've got data protection.
Okay, data protection, obviously a big one.
Strong confidentiality agreements.
Okay.
Information ownership rights.
Right.
They even talk about Chinese walls
Chinese walls. Okay.
to prevent conflicts of interest.
So those Chinese walls are like,
Yeah, they're like those ethical and informational barriers
right, to prevent information from flowing
to prevent the flow of information,
between different parts
different parts of the organization,
in an organization.
to avoid conflicts of interest.
So keep things separate.
Keep things separate.
Protect confidentiality.
That's confidentiality. Yeah.
Okay. What
About
about
financial protection.
financial protections, right?
They need to think about things like guarantees,
Okay.
indemnities,
Right.
to protect them if the provider fails to deliver.
Right. So if the provider does
If they don't do what they're supposed to.
do what they said they would do.
Yeah, and it causes them financial harm.
So having those
Contractual safeguards
contractual safeguards in
Yep.
place
to minimize their exposure.
to minimize their exposure.
And they need to think about
Okay.
the provider's compliance with their own policies.
Okay. With their own policies and procedures.
Can't just assume they'll do things the same way.
So they need to be explicit
Explicit about their expectations.
about those expectations.
Yeah, in that contract.
So
Yeah.
making sure the
A
provider
provider
is
is
aligned with their standards.
Yeah, aligned with their standards.
When it comes to things like security, data handling, even ethical considerations.
That's right. Those ethical considerations are important.
Okay.
And then how are changes going to be handled?
Right. Changes to the outsourcing arrangement.
What if the provider wants to subcontract?
Right. Or if the firm's needs
If
change.
the firm's needs change, you got to have a process for that.
So maintaining control and flexibility
Control and flexibility, yeah.
throughout the relationship.
Absolutely.
And they also need to consider
They do.
what happens if the provider
Yeah.
experiences problems,
Problems like
like a major outage
your
or
major outage,
even financial failure.
financial failure, right?
So again, having
Having those backup plans
those backup plans.
and not being solely reliant
right.
on one provider.
And finally establishing
A solid relationship management framework
okay, relationship management framework.
and a service level agreement.
Okay, service level agreement.
Clear expectations for performance,
Okay.
mechanisms for monitoring
Okay.
and reporting,
Okay.
and a process for addressing those performance issues.
So treating the provider
As a part of
as a partner,
yeah,
not just a vendor,
not just a vendor,
and having open communication.
open communication.
You got it.
But even with
All
all those precautions in place,
those precautions, things can still go wrong.
right, and that's where insurance comes in,
Insurance.
right, as a potential tool to mitigate the operational risk.
Okay, let's talk insurance.
Let's talk insurance.
How does it fit in?
How does it fit into
bigger
this
thing.
whole operational resilience picture?
Is it just about buying a policy and hoping it covers everything?
You're right? Is it that simple?
Well, Chapter 13 gives some good insight.
Okay.
They remind firms
Okay.
that while insurance can help reduce
Okay.
the financial impact,
Of those events.
oh,
It doesn't address
it doesn't address the non-financial
or
impact,
non-financial, like
like reputational damage.
reputational damage. Yeah.
Okay.
So insurance can help with the cost,
It can help with the costs.
but it can't fix your reputation.
Right. It can't rebuild
Can't rebuild that trust.
that trust with clients.
That's right.
And they caution firms
They do.
against seeing insurance
Don't see
as a
them
substitute
as a substitute for having
those robust systems
robust systems
and controls
in place.
in place. Yeah.
So it's not about thinking.
It's not about thinking.
Well, we have insurance, so we can relax.
You can relax.
On the operational resilience front,
On the operational resilience front,
it's about having
the proactive measures,
the proactive measures
Yeah.
and the financial protection.
the financial protection,
Okay.
and when they are considering using insurance.
Chapter 13 has some helpful considerations.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay?
What are some of the things firms need to think about
When it comes to insurance,
when it comes to insurance?
well, they need to think about the delay in receiving payment.
Okay, so it's not
It's not always an instant process.
an instant process.
No, especially if there's a dispute about the coverage.
Right.
So they need to think about
They need to be able
how they'll fund their operations.
to run their
like
operations
while they're waiting.
while they're waiting.
Even that payout,
So even if they have insurance,
even if they have insurance,
they need to have enough cash on hand
enough cash on hand
to kind of weather the storm,
to weather that storm,
to cover those immediate
those immediate expenses.
expenses.
And they need to think about
They need to think about,
the financial strength of the insurer.
is the insurer
Is the insurer financially sound
financially sound
to actually pay out
to pay out
on those claims?
especially if there are
Especially if there are a lot of claims
multiple claims
or a
or
really big one.
a very large claim.
Yeah, think about those travel insurance policies.
Right.
They're great
If the company's still around
if the company's still around when you need them.
when you need them,
Yeah, but if they've gone bust,
you're out of luck.
you're out of luck.
And then they need to
And they need to review
those limiting
those
conditions.
limiting conditions and exclusion clauses
Yeah, those are important.
that are often buried
Buried in the fine print.
in the fine print.
So they need to
You
understand
need to understand what's covered
what's covered and what's not.
and to make sure
Make sure it aligns with their needs.
it aligns with their needs.
Yeah, and their risk profile.
So it's all about reading
Reading the fine print.
the fine print,
Yeah,
understanding those limitations
understanding the limitation
before you sign on the dotted line.
before you sign. That's right.
So we've seen throughout this deep dive,
That operational resilience is
it's complex,
a complex
a multi-layered,
and multi-layered concept
it really is,
that touches virtually every aspect
every aspect
of
there.
a firm's operation.
The firm's operations, yeah.
It's not just about technology or processes or people.
It's all of those things
It's about all those things
working together
working together
to create a firm,
to create a firm that can withstand
those disruptions,
those inevitable disruptions
and continue to serve their clients,
or continue to serve their
no
client
matter what.
no matter what.
Yeah.
It's about understanding
Understand
the interconnectedness of the firm
the interconnectedness,
and the wider system.
the wider financial system,
You're taking a holistic approach,
a holistic and proactive approach
proactive approach
to minimize
to minimize the impact.
the impact of those disruptions.
It's not easy.
And it's clear
It's clear.
from the FCA's guidance
Yeah, it's an expectation.
that this isn't just a nice to have. It's not.
This is a core expectation
It's a must have for firms
operating in the UK.
operating in the UK financial services sector.
They're setting a high bar,
They're setting a high bar,
and they're providing
and they're not just setting expectations.